Algeria's President Abdelaziz Bouteflika says he'll soon stand down. Is this a crucial turning point in the country or a ploy by those who hold the real power to protect their interests? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. The Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika says he's abandoned his bid for a fifth term. But the man who's led Algeria for 20 years doesn't seem to be leaving his post anytime soon. Bouteflika's announcement came after 3 weeks of protests against his plans to run for a fifth term in office. The president has also postponed next month's presidential elections indefinitely and appointed a new prime minister. He's also said a national conference will be held to reschedule an election and draft a new constitution. But that's not going to happen before the end of the year, leaving Bouteflika in power in the meantime. Algerians who first celebrated his decision are now back on the streets of central Algiers demanding the whole regime goes. Mohamed Jamjoun sets up our discussion with this report.
When Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika abandoned his bid for a fifth term in office, there were celebrations, but they were short-lived. On Monday evening, the demonstrators were euphoric. Then the reality set in. While Bouteflika outlined a series of steps which he hopes would shape Algeria's future, he announced that next month's election would be delayed. But Bouteflika would remain in power until further notice. On Tuesday, protesters were still out on the streets. Former Prime Minister Ali Ben Flies says the government needs to listen to the people.
Throttling the president's attempt to run for a fifth term is an achievement made by the Algerian people, not a favour or grant by anybody. The people lived up to their aspirations, lived up to their responsibility, especially that the constitution was violated, where a president's term runs for 5 years only. The current term has been extended without the people's approval or endorsement in the constitution.
Bouteflika postponed the elections without consulting parliament, as it is mandated by the constitution. This video broadcast by Algerian state television appears to show Bouteflika after his return to the country. Among the other announcements made by Bouteflika, that a national conference would be held by the end of the year in order to schedule an election and draft a new constitution. According to the Reuters news agency, Algerian diplomat Lakhdar Brahimi will lead the national conference, which is also expected to include representatives of demonstrators as well as war veterans. Bouteflika has reshuffled the government, appointed his interior minister Noureddin Badawi as prime minister and his advisor Ramtan Lamamra as his deputy. The army chief general Ahmed Gaid Saleh retains his post. But it's unlikely Bouteflika's decisions will contain the anger of the anti-government movement. Some opposition figures were either banned by the Constitutional Council from running against the president or pulled out, describing the April election as a farce. The protesters insist they will continue their rallies until their demands are met. They want a new president now, along with democratic reforms and a government capable of tackling rising unemployment, poverty, and corruption. Mohamed Jamjoun, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's bring in our experts to discuss this further. And in Algiers, we have Amel Boubekeur. She's a research fellow at the Paris-based School of Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences. In London, Olivier Guita. He is managing director of the risk consultancy Global Strat. Thank you both for joining us. Amel, let me start with you. You were on this programme just a few days ago with me. I know it's the third time you've been on in 3 weeks. The first time was on March the 2nd. Let me ask you to go back in your mind to then. Did you expect that you'd have a moment 3 weeks on with Bouteflika saying he's standing down?
Yes. Unfortunately, it was expected. It was expected by the Algerian people. It was expected by the protesters, and it was expected by the analysts who know about Algeria's history. Because that's not the first time that the regime is using demands for change, the people's demands for change, and using them in order to stay in power. They did so in 1962 when they marginalized the political commandment in favor of the military commandment. They did so in 1965 when President Boumediene took over Ben Bella and explaining that the country needed reforms. They did so in 1989 after the riots of 1988, asking for more freedom, and the answer of the regime was that they will have a multi-party system, but they still use that in order to stay in power and to have the military commandment still in control of the situation.
Okay, so Amel, what you're saying is this is a not so clever ploy. Then is that your view?
It's not that it's not that clever. It's totally in line with the regime's logics. That is, and at least it has the merit to have clarified the situation. It is now accepted and understood and enacted that the Algerian is not willing to negotiate any transition for now. With the Algerian people, they keep on ignoring Algerians as political actors that may make them accountable. So not a new move, actually. And it has also the advantage of having clarified another point on the Algerian side, that Algerians don't want the regime to be in control of the transition. They have said so. They have shown so through the demonstrations. I mean, right after Bouteflika's announcement, people were asking each other to join the next Friday march. So we are still in the same logic that the regime has been used for so long, and even after 2011, when Bouteflika was trying to avoid Algeria and Arab Spring, the so-called Arab Spring, he was also offering reforms and constitutional amendments. So not business as usual, actually.
Business as usual, Olivier. Do you agree with that? Do you think this is a historic moment or not?
I think that the historic moment is that it took them so long, basically, to agree on Bouteflika not being a figure. Because if you go back, even in December, there were extremely strong rumors that the election would be delayed, that Bouteflika would not be the candidate, and also that the constitution would be changed. What is still amazing for me is that if we go back in history, Bouteflika had his major cardiovascular accident in 2013, and since then, he's been more or less a vegetable, and he hasn't been ruling the country. So already in 2014, it's interesting that the clan behind him couldn't agree on a common candidate. Now, they had 6 years to prepare for what happened yesterday, and still, as of now, we don't know who's going to be the men leading and successing Bouteflika from their own ranks. I mean, Salah, the head of the army, is 79, is very close to the regime, but if you see his last statements in the past few weeks, he had made sure that the army was viewed as a position of strength, of stability, and providing safety and security for Algerians. So the main question remains, when will the elections be postponed, and who will be the candidate of the old clan, if you will?
And as you say, Olivier, the President Bouteflika, had a stroke in 2013. We keep hearing statements issued in his name, but the public haven't heard him at all. He doesn't make speeches. They haven't heard his voice. He's a silent president.
Exactly. I mean, he hasn't spoken in 6 years. And that's what makes it even more ridiculous when you think about what's happening within the political realm. But in those 6 years, if you see what happened, the regime got rid of a lot of important figures, especially Toufik, the head of the security services, and also there was a purge of generals. So there's been a lot of, if you will, cleanup within the ranks behind Bouteflika of very faithful people to him. The army will obviously take the leading role. Now the question is, will they go the Sisi route, as in Egypt? As you will see somebody like Salah take over and be viewing himself as the Messiah, if you will, and being the man of stability, being just a transition. There are so many questions, but as your guest has mentioned, it's all part of a ploy of the old guard, if you will, to preserve power.
You talk about the old guard and people disappearing from the scene. Interestingly, in the last 24 hours, a somewhat familiar figure has re-emerged to the scene. We can see the pictures of him meeting President Bouteflika. This is Lakhdar Brahimi. Interesting, the camera is on very wide shots, only a couple of very short shots of President Bouteflika himself. They don't want to focus on him. Mr. Brahimi was once the foreign minister of Algeria. He's since become a veteran diplomat. In fact, our viewers have probably seen him mediating various conflicts around the world. He was involved in Lebanon. He was also involved after the fall of the Taliban in Afghanistan, coming up with the Karzai government there in Afghanistan. And he was involved in Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. He put the first Iraqi government in many ways together again as the UN representative. Amel, a very well-known figure on the international stage. Is he respected by Algerians?
Well, you know, beyond the figure of Lakhdar Brahimi, I think that this shows that Bouteflika's announcements were not made towards Algerians themselves, but rather towards its its international partners, to show that the Algerian regime is still in control. And indeed, using the figure of Lakhdar Brahimi may have had the aim of calming down worries of Paris and Washington. But beyond these figures, if you ask young Algerians now about Lakhdar Brahimi or whoever, I mean, even the politicians that are now members or will be members of the transition government are actually the same people that have been linked to Bouteflika and the regime for the past 20 years. So no new blood here. And beyond these figures, as I said, what is important and what is discussed currently within the ranks of Algerians is that the regime has signed his unwillingness to conduct a transition within a legal framework. It means that they were illegitimate, they are now illegal. And this is what actually makes Algerians even more reluctant to talk about the pouvoir, the mise en scène of the pouvoir being through Brahimi or one another. You know that the decision to cancel the elections, for example, is not even constitutionally based. The Constitution does not allow the president to cancel or postpone the elections in such circumstances. It mentions, although it's not of the president's responsibility, it mentions only the possibility to cancel or postpone the elections in times of war. So the main important question is how illegal this regime now is according to his illegal decisions, and for how long the Algerian will allow them to still behave as they were in responsibility, as if they have the responsibility of the state. How long it will take before the Algerian will take back their state and its institutions.
Olivier, we'll get further in the discussion to more questions about the constitution and the legality, but just on the role of Ambassador Brahimi, I've dealt with him, I've spoken to him during the Syrian peace process. He seems to me, in my interactions, to be an honourable man. Is he being used as a stooge here in your view?
It looks like it. I mean, he is the figure most well known on the international scene. He's the one that obviously is calming the worries of the West, but as well from the population side, he's part of the old regime. I mean, it's not that you're bringing in somebody that has no political history and hasn't been so associated with the regime. So that's one point. The second point to take on the main question is really there's no major opposition figures. I mean, the regime has been extremely good, as all dictatorships are, at muting the opposition. So when we're talking about a transition, we're not even talking to later on free elections. And that's where the crux of the issue will come. I mean, Algerians on the street will not stop at just Bouteflika not running again, because anyway, he was not the man running the country. It was mostly his brother Said and Salah and others behind it. So the question remains, where do we go from here, and how much the regime will have to give in to the pressure of the streets?
Amel, what they're talking about, and certainly the statement from President Bouteflika, talks about a national conference, inclusive and independent, to be headed by an independent, consensual and experienced national figure. We're already hearing that Brahimi might be that figure. It's interesting to me, that has sort of historical echoes of actually watching Ambassador Brahimi in action in Afghanistan. It looks like you're bringing in a father of the nation. It's time for Algeria's lawyer Jirga. Will people take part in this national conference? And given there were members of the ruling party who have broken away from Bouteflika, might this be an effort to divide the opposition now?
Well, we have to be careful when we talk about the opposition in Algeria, because if we talk about the opposition parties, these parties have been co-opted more or less by Bouteflika himself throughout his fourth mandate. So they have lost all credibility, being Islamist or whatever. They have lost all credibility among the Algerian people. They spent their time talking about the pouvoir, talking to the pouvoir, and not talking to the people, to not asking the people, or not helping them about their demands, and not helping them even now to refine their demands of change and to organize themselves in order to think about the transition. So basically, Algerians are left alone with the responsibility to think about their transition, and they are trying to do so by organizing themselves at a local level, at universities level, trying to think about new ways to participate, new ways to organize the elections. And for this movement to last, they will have to do two things. There are two different things. They will have to still put the pressure on the regime through the march and demonstrations in order to force him to negotiate a peaceful way forward, because that's really the main question. Is the army going to respect the peaceful character of the demonstrations next Friday? So that will be one step, and the second step will be to not to disconnect and not expecting the regime to offer a way forward. And I believe that this is what we are going to see emerging. We are going to see some kind of parallel initiatives. You were mentioning Lakhdar Brahimi, but there have been some names circulated within civil society. The name of Mustafa Bouchachi, for example, the president of the Human Rights League in Algeria, and these names and these proposals have not been heard or even included by the regime in its announcement.
Olivier, we heard Amel there talk about le pouvoir. That's the powers that be, I think, is the nearest way to translate that. And they seem to be the cabal, the shady cabal that are governing this country while you see that president in a wheelchair unable to talk. Give us your idea of who they are and whether they actually agree on the way forward right now.
Look, it's a triumvirate, if you will. We mentioned earlier Said Bouteflika, Abdelaziz Bouteflika's brother, Gaid Saleh, the head of the army. We have also the head of the security services. But I think that one point that is crucial to understand in this framework of a domestic issue is the international issue that is coming to the fore. We had the Arab Spring, and I think that Western governments have now understood the mistakes they made during the Arab Spring. But also at the same time, Algeria is different from other countries because of what happened in 1991. The free and fair elections where the Islamists won and the army stepped in, and it was the beginning of a bloody civil war that killed 150,000 people. I think you have to highlight this at the same time as Washington and especially Paris being extremely worried about some kind of destabilization of Algeria. And I think that, as we've seen in the past, unfortunately, foreign powers have intruded in some of the country's history, and that's something that we have to reckon with. When we're looking at the domestic opposition, somebody will have to come in to basically, as Amel put it, stop Washington and Paris from worrying about the transition.
Amel, what should the international community do about this? Not a lot of comments so far from the international diplomatic community. A comment from France that didn't say a lot. Would you like to see the international community involved? France, which used to be the colonial power, currently the president of the UN Security Council. Would you like them to get involved?
Well, Algerians currently reject this possibility. During last Friday March, we have seen new slogans emerging, such as especially targeting international interference. So Algeria are really reluctant to see any international interference, and that's also a trait that the regime has been used in order to frighten the Algerians for the past years. Be careful, do not touch the streets, otherwise we won't have any more stability, and then foreign countries will invade Algeria and take its resources and so on.
Okay,
but
I'd like to just, because we're coming to the end of the discussion, and clearly Friday is going to be the big moment, potentially with more protests. I'll ask you each in turn whether you're optimistic. Amel.
I believe, yeah. I mean, according to what we see here, people are a bit stressed, to be honest, but still determined, because, of course, it's accumulating, it's adding tensions not to have the regime offering a real way forward for the transition. But at the same time, they are still determined to take the streets on Friday. I think we are going to see the most important demonstration since the beginning of this movement, and they are, the only thing I hope is that they are not this frustration of this feeling of being frustrated because they are not allowed to participate directly. The system is still ignoring them. It's not going to turn into something that it will be more violent. They will have to keep on with the peaceful character of the demonstrations, and it will be dangerous that the regime still choose to keep silent, really, and not try to negotiate in real terms with the Algerian, taking them seriously.
Okay, Olivier, very quickly. Are you optimistic that this can stay peaceful, there can be transition? Quickly, please.
It could stay peaceful in the next few weeks, yes, but the regime will have to give in something, because if it's business as usual, as we said, the streets is not going to be happy. So we'll need to see what the plan B is, who they're going to put forward, and what are the future of free and fair elections in Algeria.
Well, thank you both very much for joining us. Our guests, Amel Boubekeur and Olivier Guetta. Events in Algeria will continue to be covered on our news bulletins around the clock on Al Jazeera. You can watch those bulletins and view this programme anytime you want by going to our website, aljazeera.com. We want to hear from you too. Post your comments at our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or on Twitter, our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'll be reading all your comments. Until next time, though, bye-bye.